Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about CVs and seniors. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, could you spill some light on how should a CV of a senior software engineer differ from that of a mid-level or a junior? Or rather, how can I as a recruiter figure out that someone is not quite who they claim to be from their CV? What mistakes do senior engineers usually do trying to look better than they are? Thank you in advance. Oh, actually, there's a second part here. I can answer my own question. It seems to be that juniors tend to favor adding a lot of emphasis on tools and languages and libraries and frameworks, presumably to fill their CV out, but they are also very basic things. And I suspect that mentioning things like Git and make and CMake, bash scripting and so on does not go over as well on a senior CV. Well, you are absolutely right about that. Usually the biggest tell is of course always years of experience. Years of experience is the number one thing that gives away your level of proficiency in software. Uh, and the second thing is the stack that you care to mention, your hard skills, what you actually put on there, and the I think Git is a nice thing. It's a little bit of a controversy because it depends a little bit on culture and value systems and so forth. We could take a more extreme example. If you are claiming to be a software developer and you put on your CV that I don't know, you know Microsoft Office or that you know the Windows operating system. I mean, I'm not going to say this or that about it, but to a lot of serious software companies, that is like a carpenter saying that you know how to use a hammer. It's a tell more than it is a boon to your CV, simply because it is so obvious or so expected that that is the minimum level, because you would not be able to use a computer without any type of operating system. Now, of course, if you're going to be a system admin, or like, it depends a little bit, because if you're going to be a Linux admin or a Windows admin, or you're going to handle a lot of servers and so forth, that might be irrelevant. But I hope you can understand that there is usually with junior experiences, since they don't really know the lingo, or they don't really know the value systems, they simply try to add everything. And some things are absolutely relevant, but sometimes you see things that are a little bit, well, bash scripting as an example. It's not really relevant. So that you add it in there, well, it's hard to say if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it's going to be a good thing, and sometimes it's going to be a bad thing. For seniors, because they have a slightly different position than the junior. So if the junior tries to inflate by knowledge, saying that I know a lot of stuff, because that's usually the way it goes, right? They don't have years of experience, so they try to fill it out with everything else, right? That in of itself is a little bit funny sometimes, because I've seen CVs where the person in question claims to know more tools than I've ever seen anybody. I mean, more tools than I have, and more tools than like any of my senior coworkers have. Uh, Yet they've only ever been to school. Like, they've never actually done any work. So as it's we kind of, you understand that this person has done some hobby level stuff, most likely, with all of these tools, but they can't. There's no way they could know all of this to a master level. That's not always the requirement, but it does show something. For the seniors, they do have the years of experience, but now comes a much harder problem, which is, honestly, I'm not going to say that it's worse, because every wherever you are and if something is scary to you, it's usually most scary to you when you're actually facing it, regardless of where you are. And this is something that doesn't really go away, because you might think that just because you become a senior software developer, then you're in the clear forever, right? No, well, yes and no. You have the years, but now it's not a matter of the years themselves. Now it's a matter of the quality of those years. And that is, I think, really interesting, because if you have been working for years and years and years, you have stuff to put on your CV. But now it's really about what do you like, what have you done during those years? What tools have you used? What are you proficient with, and so forth. And something that the seniors usually try to do is that they try to either inflate their own importance, or they try to leverage their years and make it a little bit unclear what they've been spending their time doing in order to favor themselves. So an example would be, let's say that I as a employer, I have a role for a DevOps specialist. And so I have two CVs, and on one CV I read that the person has 10 years of developer experience, and then I look at the stack, because usually in my experience the way that you can tell the actual skill of a senior, it's very important now that you understand before I say this, that there is a reason, guys, why we have recruiters, code tests, and interviews and all this stuff. Just having a CV makes it almost impossible to tell how good someone is. You can get a feel for some people depending on if it's like wildly there are some flags here and there, but even just red flags is not enough for you to dismiss a CV. You still have to talk to people. You still have to go through a little bit of a process, which is one of the problems with hiring software IT experiences. So let's say that we had this senior who has 10 years of experience, or claims to have that, and that is I think by most people's definition an experienced developer. But then I also see that in the stack this person has mostly done WordPress. That's the tool that they list as their primary thing. And the work that they've been doing is usually at small agencies or small firms or consultancies and things like that. And then on top of that, they claim to have DevOps specialist knowledge, where they've done DevOps work in maybe one or two of their employments in fairly recent time. Well, that is going to be a little bit of a red flag for me, or I would say for most employers, because if what you're claiming is that you work primarily with WordPress and then you do DevOps, these are very widely different stacks. Or I mean, you can of course be a DevOps engineer and use WordPress. I'm simply saying that if the majority of your experience is with WordPress, and especially at small scale, it's very unlikely that you have any real battle-tested exposure to DevOps engineering, because the work that you do and the tools that you use in a DevOps role is fairly different from the sort of challenges that you will face in, say, with WordPress or in these very small firms. So it seems it may not be intentional, but it does create a mismatch in expectation. Because if I'm looking for someone who's really good at DevOps, then this person's CV doesn't really say that this person is really good at DevOps. This person's CV is saying, I'm really good at WordPress and I've learned how to do DevOps. If that makes sense. That doesn't mean that they're bad. It's just something that it is an indicator on what they've spent their time doing. And then let's say I have another CV where someone claims to have been a DevOps specialist, and they've worked in, say, .NET primarily at bigger companies for, say, 10 years or something like that, a similar amount of time. Then that is going to be a better bet, because working with .NET and in fairly large companies and having that as your primary focus, that exposes you very clearly, in many cases at the very least, more to DevOps and the sort of roles that I might be looking for if I'm hiring such a person. It can be anything. Like, I'm just taking DevOps as an example here. It can be literally anything. So if you are a fairly experienced developer yourself, it's actually, you will start to see a pattern in the stacks and the roles that people have. You will know, for example, that if someone's been a sysadmin for the longest time, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a good software developer. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that they can't learn to be it. It's just that if people are putting these things on their CV, if they're trying to tweak their CV to make it sound as if they've had a more important role than they've actually had, or that they have knowledge in areas or expertise in areas that, well, the proportions are actually wrong. Just because you have 10 years, as I said, that doesn't really say much. If you have 10 years in WordPress and like 6 months in DevOps, well, then you really do, like, yeah, sure, you have experience, but you really do only have 6 months. That's what you have. But you try to leverage the years that you have in your favor. And so that's something that I see this quite often with, especially with seniors who are looking to either switch roles or move into management or things like that. The thing is, most recruiters have no way of telling this. Like, this is why you usually find these sorts of issues at the interviewing stage or fairly late in the process, because as I said, the years of experience does trick practically every recruiter, because they have no way, they don't know the stacks, they don't know the culture, because every community in IT is different and they will produce different levels of quality when it comes to developers. Some developers are usually, if you recruit from a specific type of language or a specific stack, you kind of know that if you find a person who knows this, the odds are very high that they will be very good. And in other areas, it's much more of a wild card. You don't really know what you're getting. You're going to have to test them. So what I want you to take away from this is that it's important to not have too many preconceptions when you're looking at CVs, because at the end of the day we have code tests and interviews and so forth, because we have no good way to evaluate how good somebody is. But what I usually see when it comes to seniors trying to inflate their CV or trying to mislead the recruiters into believing that they're better than they are, the focus is usually to try to convince you that the years that they have in the industry are quality years, that they know things, or that they're very experienced with things that they may not be so experienced with, because they have the years. But now the question is, do they have the right years, the quality years? And usually the way you tell it is by looking at their previous roles. What type of work have they been doing, and what stack have they been using? Because if they claim to, as I was saying, if they've done WordPress for a lot of time, and that's like the main thing they mention as part of their roles in previous jobs, and then they have some DevOps and they're looking for a DevOps role, well, then those 10 years are not DevOps oriented. Those 10 years are WordPress oriented, and you need to be able to understand the differences in workflow and roles and so forth. And usually only other developers are very good at figuring this sort of stuff out. But it is something that happens quite often with senior engineers, that they try to do this sort of thing. So it's worth knowing that if you're hiring seniors, it's probably a good idea for you to have some other person who is fairly senior that can make a judgment call when you get to talk to this person. Have a great day.